Look, apologies are all well and good, but sometimes they can't be enough. Hey there, folks. We're going to talk about YouTuber apologies today. Sort of. We're going to kind of branch off into a larger topic, and I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to title this, but depending on how I did, I should probably clarify right up front. This is not meant to be specifically about any particular individual apology. And in fact, some of the things I'm going to talk about weren't actually even apologized for. But as I said, we're going to sort of branch off into a bigger thing. Here's what we're not doing today. I have already done a video broadly talking about YouTuber apologies and why they almost never work. My main thesis in that one was most of the things these people did were things that required them to apologize as human beings and show vulnerability, but they're also a business, and apologizing as a business has to be hollow and accepting as little blame as possible because you don't want your customers to go away. In the case of YouTube, that's your audience. So those two clashing needs rendered nearly every YouTuber apology kind of meaningless and toothless in most cases. And in some cases, very, very strange. But I'm not really dealing with that. And I also want to be clear, the kinds of things I'm going to be talking about, the things that get apologized for or show up, even if they don't get apologized for, in YouTubers' videos that I want to address aren't the kinds of things that we tend to think of when we think of YouTuber scandals. We are not talking about Colleen Ballinger or James Somerton or Onision, and definitely no kind of inter-channel drama. I'm talking about what do we do when the thing that needs to be addressed, apologized for or not, is the work itself. When something happens that reveals a fundamental problem with the work. So I should probably say what it was that sent my brain down the rabbit hole that you now get to enjoy. A video was done by Anthony Gramuglia, who I do know and am in casual contact with. We're not close enough to say that we're friends, but we're friendly. He did a video talking about a situation that happened with the channel Anime Men, which was not a channel I was familiar with, nor did I have any idea what it was that happened. I'm not going to go into excessively heavy detail about it because, again, this is the springboard for where I'm going. But the short version is the Anime Men was a channel that started during the lockdowns and basically amounted to these handful of guys who were taking in anime and talking about it and sharing their enthusiasm about it as they got further into it. Well, they did a video kind of recently, which was a list looking at older animes than they had been looking at up to that point. And they kind of showed their ass on it. Basically, they inadvertently revealed how little respect they had for the ancestry of anime, how little respect they had for the things that led to the more modern things that they liked a lot more, how little they understood about the importance or even what people liked at the time about a lot of these things. And they ended up slamming a lot of older animes in ways that, to people who knew anything about them, came across as incredibly ignorant. So when they got called out about that, because they got called out a lot, and not just by the audience, that kind of went viral in the bad way because it became something for other YouTubers to dunk on because of how bad their takes were on this. Well, that led to an apology video. And that was what Anthony Gramuglia was discussing. And he showed a couple little clips of that apology video. And as I was watching those clips, I had a thought.
In all seriousness, we aren't here to defend ourselves. The video we made was just outright garbage, and we have no one else to blame but ourselves for that.
So not only was the entire concept of the video bad, but just the way we went about it was also terrible.
The reason why the video turned out the way it did is because we were just downright lazy. And in all honesty, we just wanted to upload the video and meet a deadline.
I'm hearing that. Now, granted, I didn't know the Anime Men. I'm certainly not a fan of theirs, but I did find myself thinking, you know, if I was a fan of yours, I'd really be wondering, given your explanation, is throwing together something in a rush with very little effort put into it something that happened this time? Or is it something that happens regularly and it just went so badly this time that it broke containment and now you have to address it? Because while they admitted to putting together a bad video, at least the parts of the explanation that I saw didn't really address why this was an outlier. It kind of took as a given, oh, this is bad, our normal stuff is good. But if the problem is that it's rushed and your audience just hasn't called you on it before, or you haven't been spotted by people outside your audience who know that you were talking out your ass, how do we know this isn't a regular problem? Because keep in mind, these guys have a new video every week, every Monday. It's right there in their banner. Now, I have a weekly upload schedule too, but I also have way lower production value than these guys. They are sometimes shooting skits. They're shooting in front of a green screen. They have way more editing that goes into this. Not to mention coordinating schedules and however much anime they have to watch in order to do this. They do a lot to be cranking stuff out on a weekly schedule. Although, I'll note that it was about 3 weeks from when that video that everybody hated came out, that the apology came out, and it's been about another 3 weeks to a month since then, and they have yet to upload anything else. So I'm not sure what's going on behind the scenes there. I don't want to dwell on this because this video is not meant to be about the anime men, but it's hard for me to buy that this is the only video you made that was rushed and lazy when you're keeping a production schedule of videos this length with this production value. You know, there's a reason the big video essayists don't have a regular upload schedule anymore if they ever did, and it's one of the reasons I tend to be reluctant to consider myself an essayist because I do put out weekly videos. Some of them I consider video essays, a lot of them I don't. It's probably always worth at least giving a little bit of side eye to anybody who has a suspiciously frequent upload schedule, given the quality of the stuff they're putting out. This was the case with Illuminati. This was the case with James Somerton. Now, to be clear, the two people I just cited were plagiarists. I am not accusing the anime men of that. I have no reason to think that is the case. And in fact, I'm going to try and be understanding and give some benefit of the doubt here. I guess the logical conclusion to come to is that they ran up against a deadline that they had to meet for a sponsor that they had already been paid for, or like they had a contract with that they were meant to deliver something by a certain date. Like that does happen. And it also can happen that you start a project that you think is going to be easy to put together. It turns out to be way bigger and you end up rushing it, not necessarily because that's a standard part of your process, but because it ballooned into more than you thought and you kind of have to just sprint to get it finished. I've been in that situation. Thing is, usually by the time I realize this is way bigger than I thought it was going to be, I slot in something else and move that to a later date if it is at all possible for me to do. But look, sponsors are a thing that I do know about even though I don't normally do them. Although I do have a sponsor for this episode. This video is sponsored by the book Dancing on the Precipice by As Is. Yep, no, that's definitely what it says. It says as is. Okay, well, we'll read some ad copy. Rebooting my life at a Fortune 500 company, would I end up a corporate stooge or a maverick pulling the company along the way? Sure, I had 14 years as a software developer under my belt, but would this company unmask me as a fraud? A professional science fiction writer, had I truly left behind my Hollywood aspirations? Or would my personal secrets lead to a well-deserved downfall and a reevaluation of my choices? I'd overcome a troublesome childhood, I had survived the gossipy medical establishment, but would I unwittingly impose my sexual predilections on some of my co-workers? You'll find me dancing on the precipice. This is the long-awaited third volume in the A Freakish Life series of memoirs. And they are available only at Amazon. Hey, as a self-published author, I know it's by far the easiest place to get your stuff up on. But regardless, I would encourage you to take a look at this work and the other works by this author, see if it's of interest to you, and check them out at the link in the description below. Oh, and just on the off chance anybody thinks I'm being a dick by poking fun at the author's pen name or the fact that they're only on Amazon, these were actually things suggested by them when we were talking about doing the sponsorship. So they're self-deprecating. That certainly counts for something. Go ahead and check them out. And thank you again for sponsoring this video. But coming back to the anime men and that question that hit in my head, this notion of, okay, did you just accidentally reveal that all of your stuff, or at least a decent chunk of it, is also thrown together with little research and little care, and you're only apologizing the one time you got called on it really bad? That's the kind of thought that can actually make me fall off a channel completely. Because it's happened before for me. It's actually happened 3 times before. And I want to talk about all 3 times to sort of illustrate the ways in which accidentally revealing the flaws in the product can manifest. Now, what I'm not going to do is I am not going to name any of the 3 channels or creators that I am about to cite to you. So if you were here for tea or drama, you're not going to find it. I'm not going to be giving names or indeed even pronouns of these creators. I will be referring to all of them as they, whether that is the pronoun that they use or not. Because again, I actually don't care about you knowing who these people are specifically. It's the framework that matters to me. So I'm going to be talking about 3 distinctly different channels that did distinctly different things that in all 3 cases caused me to have my confidence in their videos and their product and their persona just fall apart. So we are going to be talking about a video essayist, a genre specialist, and basically a listicle channel. So sort of 3 different kinds of things, serving different means, going about their work in different ways. And yet all 3 of them at some point did something or actually accidentally revealed something that even if they had apologized for it, I still would have left those channels and stopped following them, which I did in all 3 cases. Let's start with the video essayist. The video essayist in question was someone who talked about things that I don't really know about. That was part of what I really enjoyed about their work. It was letting me in on things that I didn't really have a base knowledge of. If I can be completely honest, it's not unheard of, but it is actually uncommon for me to watch video essays about stuff that I'm actually pretty knowledgeable about, largely because a lot of those aren't geared towards somebody with my existing base level of knowledge. So they spend a lot of time kind of covering the surface level stuff that I'm like, yeah, I know. Can we get to the deeper analysis? And maybe some of them will get there eventually, or maybe they stay at more of a surface level, which means, okay, this was entry level. I'm beyond this. So I am not actually naturally gravitated towards video essays on subjects that I have decent knowledge of. I find it far more interesting to watch video essays on subjects that I either only have like kind of a general familiarity with but don't know a lot of details, or maybe even something that I don't know much about at all. And that was what this video essayist did. They drew on their own personal experiences and research that they did to discuss and bring about thoughts and histories and events and people, things that I wouldn't have known about otherwise. But then in one of their videos, in a tangent, in a little sort of sidebar that was not the primary topic and wasn't really especially consequential, it was just a little thing that they kind of stepped out of the main thing that they were doing to say, yeah, it's kind of like this, where this. And the thing that they had the little sidebar about was something that I was actually very knowledgeable about. And when I heard what they said about that, it was wrong. And I don't mean like they had a bad take or a bad opinion. I mean, it was fundamentally wrong. Like it was the kind of thing that nobody who actually knows anything about that should say without giving a pretty thorough explanation as to how you would come to that conclusion about this thing. But of course, they didn't offer an explanation because it was a little sidebar and they came back to their main topic. And suddenly I realized, wait a minute, I've kind of been operating on faith this whole time that you actually know what you're talking about, because I don't have the base level of knowledge to check you. And I'm also not somebody to go through comments to see if you're getting called out. I don't have the patience for that. So if you are in fact full of crap with the things you normally talk about that I don't know anything about, I wouldn't know. I'd have no way of knowing. And it really shook my faith in them that the one time they deviated onto something I did know about, they were wildly off base. And it just made me realize, wait, if you are that wrong about something I know actual things about, why am I trusting you to tell me things about stuff that I don't know about? And look, to be completely honest, in a way, that is kind of the nature of the beast. When you are engaging with a video essay on a subject that you don't know, you are kind of taking it on faith that the person knows what they are talking about. You kind of have to if you don't want to just come in and be an argumentative prick about it. But once something puts a dent in that armor, a dent in that assumption, wait, I actually maybe shouldn't be trusting you, because you were so off about stuff that I actually had a frame of reference for, I'm not comfortable listening to you about anything that I don't have a frame of reference for. And so I stopped watching that video essayist. Next, let's talk about the genre specialist. Now, when I say genre specialist, I'm saying somebody who kind of specializes in a certain subsection of a medium. So this could be things like survival horror video games, superhero comic books, musical theater, noir films, that kind of thing. Somebody who just has a channel broadly talking about that subject. And this particular creator expressed and put forward themselves very much as an expert in that field. That was sort of their persona that they put forward. Now, unlike the video essayist, this was a general topic that I had some knowledge about, sort of knew a little bit more in some areas, not as much in some, but I had a base level, like more than the average layperson. I had knowledge about this subject, but I didn't have a particularly deep knowledge, and this particular creator seemed, or at least presented themselves as having a far deeper knowledge than I did. But then they were talking about something, and they shared an anecdote as part of what they were talking about. And it was one of those sort of, oh, and by the way, did you know kind of anecdotes that like you'll throw in for flavor because it's like a neat little fun fact? Except it wasn't true. And I knew it wasn't true because it was one of those sorts of things that just kind of gets passed around in certain circles where you hear it and you hear it enough and you assume it's true, but then you look into it and it's actually not. And that just kind of happens. Like, that's happened to me. I, at this point, pretty much avoid the subject of the so-called Cartmel master plan in Doctor Who because what I thought it was, or actually arguably whether it was even really a thing at all, what I thought was not accurate. Now, I had shared thoughts on that based off an understanding that was deeper than a layperson because you kind of have to be a little bit knowledgeable about the thing to have heard that anecdote. But if you actually know more than that, then you know that that anecdote is false. Now, to be clear, I'm not faulting this creator for having relayed and shared the anecdote. As I said, I've done that kind of thing by accident. I wasn't upset that they did that. Except I did check the comments to see if they addressed, because I was tempted to write my own comment about this, but I'm like, before I write it, let me see if this got addressed. Oh, it did. Lots of people pointed this out. And this creator replied, and it was their explanation that made me leave their channel. Because their explanation was, oh, I know that's not actually true, but it made for a better story and it fit the flow of the video. Now, to be clear, I don't believe that. I think that's a lie. I think that they thought it was true and didn't look into it enough to realize that it wasn't and just relayed this thing that they'd heard often enough to assume that it was true and are now lying about the fact that they didn't know that it wasn't true. And the reason to lie about it is to maintain that veneer of expertise. Because again, they put themselves forward very much as an expert in this field. While they may not necessarily describe themselves as that, they do speak from a sort of position of authority, like I'm knowledgeable about these things, that's why you should watch me. And so I think when they realized that they were wrong, they panicked and decided that it was better for them to just say, oh, no, I knew it wasn't true, because then if they admitted that they just didn't realize, then that is admitting to not being as knowledgeable as your audience thinks you are. So I don't think that that's true, but that means that they lied. Like, they put themselves in a situation where they were damned either way, because either you have such a surface level understanding of a lot of stuff that you talk about and you get away with it because your audience is less knowledgeable than you, which in and of itself is not the end of the world, but you are so fragile about your position in that you are willing to lie about it. Or it would actually be worse if their explanation was actually accurate. Me saying that I think they're lying is giving benefit of the doubt, because the alternative is that they would rather knowingly spread misinformation and a false story because it makes the story better. See, that's a thing where like an apology actually would have covered. I'm not saying like an apology video, but if the pinned comment they put at the top of that video had been, hey, I repeated this story. I had heard it so many times I assumed it was true. I didn't look into it. I'm sorry. That's my bad. That would have been an acceptable apology for what had happened. But instead, they thought it was better to paint a picture of themselves as someone who willingly and frequently lies because it makes for a better story. That's worse. And the fact that you thought that that was better makes me doubt your judgment on literally everything. So again, ditched it. The third one I mentioned was a listicle channel, which yes, I'm not above something as crass as listicles. Sometimes you want something kind of heady. Sometimes you just want background noise while you're doing something like mowing the frickin' lawn. Okay? And listicles are good for that. And this was a channel that occasionally did stuff other than lists, but like their bread and butter was list material. Lists of best of this, worst of that. It was within a certain medium. Again, I won't say what it is, but when I say medium, I mean things like television, film, video games, novels, comic books. Those are mediums. So it was sort of looking at best and worst of this year in this medium, best and worst of this year in this medium, best and worst of this long-running franchise in this medium, and stuff of that nature. So I did not have particularly high expectations of this. And in fact, I knew to a certainty that at the very least the presenters on the channel did not know what they were talking about a lot of the time. I know that because they honestly kind of joked about it. They would joke about how young they were and how there would be references to things that they weren't even alive for when they happened. So I knew that the presenters, of which there were a few, were not especially knowledgeable. And I accepted that. I did still kind of assume that the writers for the channel knew what they were talking about. But then I was listening to one of those lists. And the name of the particular project within that medium came up, and I heard the presenter say it, and it was wrong. The name was wrong. And then they kept saying it throughout the entire entry for that part of the list. They kept saying the name wrong. And it wasn't like a mispronunciation. That is a different word. Like, it only required moving a couple letters around and adding one or two in the wrong place. But it was a completely different word or phrase than was correct. But they kept saying it over and over, which meant it wasn't a flub. It was in the script. The very name of the thing they were even talking about was wrong in the script. And again, it's not that I expected deep knowledge or particularly insightful commentary from this channel. I absolutely didn't. But when even my low expectations couldn't be met, and I suddenly realized even your writers know so little about this that they wrote the wrong title repeatedly, even as vapid entertainment, my standards are better than that. And so that was another one that I had to drop and had to move on from. So what does all of this have to do with apologies? Well, to go back to that Anthony Gramuglia video, one of the things he found himself wondering is why people have a tendency to compare apology videos for things like bad media takes to apology videos from people who just have done horrible things. Why would you equate those at all? And why does it seem like sometimes people are more willing to welcome back somebody who has a documented history of really awful behavior than they are somebody who had a bad take? And the whole thing that I just went through, talking about those three examples from my own YouTubing experience as a viewer, speaks to that. Because I think for most people, ditching a YouTuber for a bad take or a bad piece of work, or in the case of the things that I gave examples of, showing accidentally behind the scenes how poorly put together their work is, the reason that that makes people angrier and more likely to hold as a grudge is because you failed at your job. When you do this, when you make YouTube videos, The end result, the video that people watch, is the product. It is your job to make that product to a certain standard. Now, if you've gone and done something off-site, off-screen, off of YouTube that involves just nasty behavior, but your work here doesn't reflect that, people are going to be more willing to forgive that. Or at least there are more people willing to forgive that than if you just did bad work. Think of it like going to a restaurant. Yes, I know, restaurant and food metaphors are trite, and you're not supposed to make them. I don't care. I'm going to anyways. If you went to a restaurant and you had a really great experience there, like the meal was great, reasonably priced, came out at a decent time, was just stellar, it was so good. But then you found out later that the working conditions that you didn't see, but the working conditions there aren't great, and people are a little underpaid. Do you think you'd be more likely to hold a grudge against them or advise people to not go there over that? Or do you think you would be more likely to say that the place is bad, hold a grudge, and warn people off from it if you went there and the service was bad, it was slow, the food was undercooked, it was greasy, it looked disgusting, and it didn't taste good? Be honest with yourself. Which one are you more likely to hold a grudge against and warn people off from? I think if you're being honest, the vast majority of us get angrier when the food is bad than we do over the work conditions aren't good, but the food is. Now, at a moral level, in terms of the impact on human beings, is that right? No. It's one meal. Get over it. Like, fine, don't go there again, but this is people's lives. This is people's lives and their ability to pay their rent, help their families, everything else. This is worse, but we respond worse to this because this is what we came for. And in the case of a video, the takes are why the audience is here. So, setting aside the viral nature of the Anime Men video and the fact that it broke containment and got reacted to by other people, just dealing with their audience, the audience was upset because the food was bad. The food being their takes. Their takes is what the audience was there for. And the product was bad. They failed at their job. Now you want to compare that to something like, say, what happened to Channel Awesome. Now, not to say Channel Awesome has not put out bad product. They absolutely have, repeatedly. And they've been dunked on and parodied and taken to task for a lot of it. But they are still successful. As successful as they used to be? No, probably not. But they are still successful enough to keep putting out videos at a regular basis and employ multiple people, including a SAG-AFTRA member. Union actors have requirements for a minimum amount of payment that they are required to get. Now, there is paperwork that you can do to get exemptions to that, but they would have to keep doing that over and over and over again in order to continue to employ Malcolm Ray. So either they are accepting a very hefty paperwork burden, or they are actually paying him what is the minimum required to pay a union actor. And if they're doing that, they're probably doing that with a lot of the other talent. Now, do I know that for a certainty? No, but my point is, Channel Awesome's scandals, by and large, the big ones at least, when there was like a whole campaign and like hashtag change the channel, it was over the treatment of other creators who were networked within Channel Awesome. And yet Channel Awesome itself and Nostalgia Critic and everything else it makes continues to this day. And I think the main reason is, and I talked about this years ago when I looked like this, I think part of the reason is that they stopped talking about it. They actually had planned to release a video, addressing a lot of the allegations, but they never did. Exactly where the cooler heads were that prevailed, I'm not sure. But I think that was the smartest thing they could have done. Because the instant they made a video on the channel addressing it, that brought an offsite problem onto the platform and to their audience, who maybe didn't know or maybe didn't want to think about it if they did. But they never did that. And they didn't wreck their production schedule. They kept putting things out at a reasonable pace that they had always been doing. And so they continue, and they are still, even now, successful. When it comes to things that happen off-site, yes, there are absolutely some things that you can do that are so atrocious that, yeah, people will absolutely drop you as soon as they find that out. But that's the thing. They do have to find out. If it happened elsewhere, if it happened on Twitter, if it happened in your personal life, they have to find that out unless you bring that information to them by addressing it in an apology. Which is why sometimes, while you could make an argument that an apology is what should happen from a strictly business perspective, a lot of channels would be better off just not doing it. But the problem is, when the actual thing you have to apologize for is your work, that is a lot harder to sell. Now, some people might still forgive. I don't know what is happening with the Anime Men's audience, if they've lost a lot of people or not. I don't know. I haven't looked into it. Don't actually care. But the point is, we tend to hold it against people so much more when their work is bad than when they are bad people. I mean, that is the epitome of the entire problematic artists debate. Because generally, that's not a conversation we need to have about people who make garbage. But it is a conversation that has to be had repeatedly, apparently endlessly in some cases, about people who either do or did at some point do good work and then have turned out to be awful people. Tom the Shadows, who talks about music and the music industry, has said that there are two kinds of music stars. There are those who have such a cult of personality that their fans are ride or die and will stick around no matter what they do. But then there are others who they will be famous and popular for as long as the songs are good and not for a single second longer. And I think that theory makes a lot of sense for music. And also, I think it makes a lot of sense for a place like YouTube. There are some folks who do develop a certain cult of personality and a certain fandom around themselves of people who will be very defensive for them and over them. That certainly happens, and I've seen it happen. Don't feel like naming names. Again, not trying to start drama, but I think for the vast majority of us, people are here for the work. They're here because they enjoy the work. If they stop enjoying the work, or it turns out that the work was never as good as they thought it was. And like, I've kind of talked about that before when dealing with controversial people like Neil Gaiman and J.K. Rowling, where like the idea, well, their stuff was never good, can often be kind of a defensive thing where like you don't have to actually address that you liked something by someone who did bad stuff. But in the case of YouTube, especially with those three sorts of things that I cited that I went through, I suddenly realized that, oh, these works were bad, or at least really potentially had massive cracks in them, and I can't know if those cracks ran through everything that that creator did or just some of the things. I have no way of knowing unless I start doing deep dives into the things that they were talking about and going through their own back catalog to figure out how bad what they were doing and putting in front of me actually was. But I'm not going to do that. My trust was shaken, so I left. When the takes become bad, that is so far more likely to get people gone. Now, that's not the only reason people lose audience, to be clear. People lose audience for a litany of reasons, including for off-site behavior. But again, if someone can keep their head down and not create a new problem, there's a good chance they'll be able to come back or stick around. Like, even with Channel Awesome, you could say like, oh, but their work is bad. I'm like, yeah, for people who aren't their audience. Like I said, there have been takedowns and whatnot of some of their recent stuff, things like the review of The Wall, that really riled up a lot of people. But the people who really tore that apart were mostly people who didn't particularly like or watch The Nostalgia Critic, or at least didn't anymore. If they had, they'd outgrown it. So the actual audience that was still there, it was on par with what they were used to. It wasn't worse. So when it comes to attempts to apologize and recover from a downturn in a career on a platform like YouTube or anything similar to it, it gets really awkward when the problem isn't your behavior or your beliefs or even your actions, but your work. Because once the work gets called into question, that ripples all the way down. This is where we can cite James Somerton, because once it became a certainty that okay, there's definitely plagiarism here, it sent H. Bomber Guy down a spiral of finding all of the rest of it. Because it didn't just happen once. And if the work is bad, while yes, it is possible to have just a fluke of a bad day. And certainly if you go back way into the earlier days of a channel that's been around for a while, maybe some of that early stuff isn't good. But the odds of it being a random fluke versus there actually being fundamental problems with the apparatus that is making it that were just more evident this time, but they're always there. That's the kind of doubt that will actually make you lose your audience. And that's the kind of thing that an apology can't fix. This is why Ned Fulmer's attempts to come back have been just the cringiest things imaginable. Ned Fulmer, quick reminder, was a member of the Try Guys. And in particular, he was known as the wife guy. His whole thing, his whole persona, his personality, what he was known for both on Try Guys and with the businesses that he launched off of it, was built around how much he loved his wife and how solid his marriage was. So while technically, yes, he got booted from the Try Guys and lost his audience for off-site behavior because he had an affair with an employee and that wrecked his marriage. At the same time, he had turned his marriage into the product. That was what he was selling his audience. My marriage is so good, but it wasn't. The product itself was flawed and he crashed and he's trying to claw his way back. And he had his, I don't know if their divorce is finalized yet, but I'm going to call her his ex-wife anyway. He had his ex-wife on for his first podcast. And it was the most humiliating thing I can ever think of somebody trying to claw their way back into good graces, was to just put himself up on the cross and let his wife verbally flog him for an hour. It wasn't endearing. It was just a reminder of how full of crap he'd always been. I cannot imagine his audience ever accepting him back. Because again, ultimately, for what he was known for and what he was loved for, that marriage was the product. Turns out the product was poison. How do you apologize for that? You kind of can't. How do you apologize for the thing that you love me for? The very reason that I have any kind of following at all is a lie, is built on falsehoods, is crumbling underneath me, is hollow. You can't really apologize for that. You can promise to do better, but will that mean that you actually improve the process by which you make stuff? Or will that mean you just try to avoid the stuff that makes you look bad? To throw it back to the anime men, they said, we're going to pledge to do better. And I was like, does that mean you actually put more time into stuff? Are sure you don't rush things and do your research and find out proper context? Or does that just mean you don't step into areas of anime that you know you don't have knowledge so that you don't look like asses again? I mean, in a way, I suppose that's improving, knowing where your limitations are, but that's not really improving the actual problem. Because if the problem is rush work, then avoiding the subjects that make it clear that the work was rushed, it doesn't really fix the problem. And again, not really about the anime men. I don't know what they're doing right now. Maybe they did get better. I mean, that's another thing. It is always possible for people to improve. But if the thing that they'd been selling you is what turns out to be rotten and hollow, why would you give them the chance to sell you something else? An apology's not going to help at that point. I just had all these thoughts that I had to get out of my head. This all spawned because that damn video by Anthony, I actually left a rather lengthy comment on and was still thinking about it even days later. I'm like, yeah, I got a full video's worth of thoughts on this. So, what has ever happened with a YouTuber or other creator in any medium where something they did made you realize that you couldn't trust what it was they'd been giving you. The very product itself. It made you doubt not just them, but the thing that you were here for. Has that happened for you? It's okay if you want to name specific people, but just be careful about getting argumentative with other people. If you decide to name specific people, be they YouTubers, writers, actors, whatever, just try not to get into fights with people in the comments. I am going to try and keep an eye on that, and there is a reason I did not name very many names in all of this, but try and be polite about it. But I am really curious. Is this an experience that is just kind of me because of how my brain works, or is it more common? I don't know. Like, I legit don't know sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, well, this is what makes sense to me. I'm sure it's like that for other people. Then it turns out, no. I legit don't know if I'm the outlier like 95% of the time. Even though probably about 80% of the time I am. Regardless, whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Patreon pays the bills and enables me to do this as my living. Another additional shout out to A Freakish Life Dancing on the Precipice. Thank you again for sponsoring this video. I hope that you will at least consider checking out that work as well. But even if you cannot support me through any of that, don't worry too much about it. I mean, the like, share, subscribe, those help as well. But what I want you to remember is that whether you have reason to doubt the work I put out or not, you are beautiful, you are valid, and you are loved. You are the council, I'm just running the meetings, and until next time, this council is adjourned. Now to thank my highest supporting patrons: Robin Moore, Jared Boyce, Subin Lutfulla, Andicate 808, Mara G, Angry Casperl, Dave Hall, Movie Turtle, Oliver B, The Baba Duchess, Sean Miller, Welsh Wrestling Geeks, Melissa Pedersen, Mary Mello, Becky Sparks, Loki Eris, Tracy Scrabbit, Pau Baraba Joggle, and Sir Didymus is my favorite. I also want to give my thanks to all the supporters who didn't get named because you are all indeed very nifty people. You could be a nifty person too if you go support me on Patreon, and there's the clause. Ugh.